Good evening and Happy New Year. We are opening our 2022 Indie Lens pop-up movie screening with Missing in Brooks. My name is Miriam Kalmogo. I will be your moderator today. I would say that if you are like me after watching this movie, you are probably in tears or in pain. As a first-generation immigrant, there is a lot of emotions going on. So before we go into the questioning and the discussion, I'm going to ask these panelists to introduce themselves and tell us why, how they connect with this movie. Leslie.
Thank you so much, Miriam and KIXC. I think this is a great event and I'm honored to be included. I publish chicosol.org, an online magazine that sometimes covers immigration. We mostly cover the Northern Sacramento Valley, but started out 15 years ago as a bilingual publication. I launched this with my husband, who had come here from Mexico, and we initially wanted to publish in both Spanish and English, but now we just publish in English. Before that, I spent a decade in Mexico City covering immigration for American newspapers, and a lot of other issues. And then my first year in Mexico, I worked in a Quaker guest house, and I only took the job because I was trying to find a way to learn Spanish fluently. But it turned out that it was a place that was receiving hundreds of refugees from Central America. So I kind of went into this with some conception of how Central American countries had been destabilized by wars that the US was very involved in. And then just to add, a few years ago, well, right at the beginning of the pandemic, I went to Tijuana and worked with asylum seekers as a volunteer with Al Otro Lado, an immigrant rights organization. So that's sort of who I am and what I've done.
Thank you, Leslie. Heidi?
Yeah, Aide, sorry, I should have said the phonetic pronunciation. My name is Aide, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. I live in Chico, but I was born in Tijuana, and I came to the U.S. when I was about 7 years old. And so just my experience growing up in a predominantly white farming community, in addition to just the experience of adapting to a new country and just the normal barriers that immigrants face. I also experienced domestic violence in my home. You kind of learn social work and interpreting for your family really early on as a youth. And so navigating all kinds of systems and services and resources and school, navigating that for my family, for my parents, it just, made me feel like I could do that for a living for other families, because there's just so many barriers, and then just so many situations that felt that they didn't have to be that way. If there was more communication of what is available, more funding towards helping people who are undocumented. I currently work for a domestic violence agency, and so I'm very familiar with not being able to assist certain families because the resources available are for people that are US citizens. And so, my connection to this film and why I was excited to be a panelist is because I can definitely relate, and it's something that you're always hoping will change. And I did choose to go to college to also learn Spanish because I had an identity, just misinformed about my identity in general. And so in college is where I learned about governments being destabilized. I had more awareness and understanding about the motives that my parents decided to move to this country. You know, it was just, when I was a kid, it was just like something we did, but I didn't really understand things that led up to that. And so it just, you know, motivated me even more to just continue participating in ways that I can help gift education. So I just hope to learn a lot from this film and from all of y'all, because anything that I learn, I'm going to share.
Thank you, Ivy. Am I saying it right?
Ivy.
Ivy.
Ivy. Thank you.
Ivy. Thank you, Ivy. So my first question, how do you feel? How did you feel after watching Missing in Brooks County? Did the film affect the way you think about immigration? Why or why not? Anyone can take it. Yeah.
I felt, you know, just providing services. I'm aware of the just the lack of empathy, the quickness to villainize people and people's actions, the broken system, and it never stops to make me cry. You know, no matter the fact that I've confronted so many obstacles trying to help people that I help. I'm so aware, and it still shocks my system just to continue seeing like evidence of just dehumanizing people to the level that there's so much malice in taking away services and resources that could save people's lives, you know, and instead of leaving the law to handle whatever they need to handle, just the motivation and the drive that some community members have to be vigilantes, to take care of the law in their own hands. All that stuff is it's overwhelming, and it's scary. It, you know, it is scary. So definitely it makes me feel all kinds of stuff. Nothing new for me, but it never stops feeling gross like it was the first time.
Thank you. It looks like we lost Leslie. So in the movie, it is hard. We see that one of the, here she's coming back. Welcome back.
I am so sorry, my internet crashed or something. Everything was suddenly gone.
I will repeat my question for you. How did you feel after watching Missing in Brooks County? Did the film affect the way you think about immigration?
I thought the film was powerful, but just profoundly sad. And it was really hard for me to watch. And I actually made myself watch it twice. And the second time I watched it, I thought it was really well made, and that it was such a tragedy, because there was a reference in the film to the fact that this is this incredibly major humanitarian crisis that's never discussed anywhere. And, you know, this was just one county. There was even a reference to the fact that there were other counties. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're talking about, you know, they were talking about 20,000 people, and 43 people have been identified. And so I thought it was just really, really sad, even though the work that Eddie Canales is doing, and the doctor, the forensic doctor, was so heartening. And I thought it was interesting how the Border Patrol agent had even been affected, and the sheriff, and that they included those perspectives, because so often we hear really awful stories about the Border Patrol. And this was a Border Patrol agent who said, you know, we call them bodies because if we call them people, it's too disturbing. And it's just kind of, it's wrenching, really, it's just wrenching. One of the things I wondered about, you know, was if you all thought that it had been intentional to set up the checkpoint 60 miles north of the border as a policy of deterrence.
Well, I would say that in the movie, it said that they're funneling the immigrants into the most dangerous part. So thinking that that would deter them. So I would say that it's probably set that way specifically, thinking that maybe that would, as they use the word, they would deter them from using it, making it so scary. But, you know, we know that when people are desperate, when what they're living is already bad, they have no hope, they would try to go through whatever danger that might, what they're seeing might be a better hope. And you were talking about what they said in the movie. Yes, that did touch me too. They said it's the nation silent mass disaster. That's the silent mass disaster. I didn't know about how deep it was. So since 1994, the U.S. Border Patrol kind of like put that policy in place, and it has caused 20,000 deaths, many in Brooke County. That was shocking.
It's shocking.
Yes.
And it shows how, you know, we've been trying to use policies like deterrence even before Trump took office. We know that President Trump tried to do this with the parents and children separation policies, but this has been going on for decades, where they think that they can scare people out of coming, and it never works. And it shows such a fundamental misunderstanding of what drives migration, as you just said, Miriam.
Yeah. Yes, I
that just, thank you for pointing that out, because that's something that I took in my notes, that just the what motivates people to cross the border. There was a rancher in the film that was interviewed who, you know, he was quick to just assume criminal activity. He was quick to assume that Eddie is like somehow facilitating the cartel and just enabling water, you know, locations. The motive has to be criminal, right? And like even deterring them, funneling them into a zone where they were most likely to die of heat, you know, exposure. Desperation is just not even considered. It's like, oh, you got to be really involved in crime to push through that. And I just, it's so frustrating that not even that piece of humanity is like, it's not allowed. And it just, I think that's where I always feel the most like it's just never going to change, because how do you influence someone's like understanding of it's a black and white issue for him. He straight up said it's a black and white issue. There's no gray area. They're illegals, they're criminals. And so it facilitates this thought of like just no compassion. And the only reason why people are coming through here is because they're bringing crime. And without shifting that view of the people that are crossing the border, it just feels so futile. you know, because as long as there's someone out there that's cynical, cynicism is just everywhere. And it hurts to know that that's really the only motive that is out there for some people.
Yeah, the word illegal or alien itself is, you know, some people are seeing it as, what do you guys think about the use of that word? Illegal, alien?
I think it's really pejorative, and especially to call people aliens. You know, it's no wonder that they become prejudiced when they hear language like that. We know how much language affects people, and so I think the, you know, correct term is unauthorized or undocumented. But yeah, I wondered if he had ever had a conversation with an immigrant. I wondered because, you know, he talked about how they could be people who are infiltrating the country to take us over. And all you have to do is have one conversation with a family that is desperate. And I think what has always struck me in my reporting is how open, overly honest people are when I talk with them about what they're doing, to the point of naivete. You know, like I kind of want to say, are you sure you want your name used? Are you sure, you know, it's okay to tell me this story? And they're so caught up in trying to survive, which seems justifiable, that they don't understand the political ramifications oftentimes of even talking to a journalist. So I just, you know, it's like you can't, when you have a conversation, you can't, you know, misconstrue somebody as like a fake terrorist, somebody who's, it doesn't make any sense. And I just wanted him to go out and talk to people. That's what I wanted.
Well, I mean, go ahead, sorry.
We do have a question. You know, we know that the danger that it takes to go through that, but some people would say, why don't they just come legally? Why? There are pathways to citizenship. There are ways of coming into the US. Why do they don't take that voice but choose to go through this?
You know, my family paid a fine, you know, we paid fines, but the circumstances in life, you know, that force you to make decisions such as leaving your family behind in your country, they're so complicated, and everybody's reason to leave their country, the resources available are different, the support is different, the sense of unsafety, just the pressure of when are you going to have everything you need at the tip of your hands when you're already struggling, you know, to be able to find opportunity and safety and all those things for your family. It's difficult to do, you know, and so even with the intention of doing things legally, they prolong the steps to the point where it complicates it, where you can't even work, you know, you can't access like a work permit. I've held people with VAWAs at my place of work, and you know, their applications have been in there for 5-6 years and they really haven't seen any kind of progress. And so they're scared and frustrated and they're in limbo. And I think the system is set up to kind of prolong things, to deter you, to suck your financial resources. And if you don't have a specific immigration status, then you don't have a social security number, which you can't work. You know, there's just so many barriers and limitations. And it's not an easy thing to do. And like I said, everybody's circumstances are different and we don't know what kind of safety concerns they have. And you're just trying to survive.
And in addition, you know, people don't understand that it can take 30 or 40 years for a Mexican citizen to get permission to come here. I mean, basically it can take an entire adult lifetime because the immigration system has caps on every country. And so the cap on Mexico is relatively low given the number of people who want to come. And then in this country, we have a backlog system. So, you know, a perfect example is, you know, Chico's famous undocumented attorney, Sergio Garcia, who's now, I think he's now a citizen. But, you know, when he told me his story, it was shocking because his whole family had legal residency and it was taking him decades and decades to get it, which is why they finally just brought him here. He would have made it as an old man if he had waited. So people don't understand that it isn't viable to wait. It just isn't viable most of the time for people from Latin America.
Thank you. This is hard. I'm trying to not get into it and influence the conversation, but it is really hard. Where are we now with immigration reform? What would you say, Leslie?
So two of the most controversial parts of Trump's policies are still in place, and that's the Remain in Mexico policy is still in place, and the pandemic order. So they're able to turn most migrants away just on the basis of COVID possible exposure. So actually, in President Biden's first 6 months, he did quite a bit. He issued something like 150 executive orders to try to repair some of the major changes that former President Trump had made. He also, you know, ICE isn't going after people here now the way it was. We don't have the big raids. It's sort of been deprioritized. He, you know, really, he got rid of the Muslim ban, things like that. So he did a lot. But then when he tried to remove the Remain in Mexico policy for asylum seekers, a court overturned that, and you know, we're stuck with it until they can figure out a way to get rid of that program that won't violate this court order. So that policy is pretty horrific in the sense that we have now, you know, these huge tent cities all over the Mexican border with tens of thousands of people seeking asylum, and asylum is given on the basis of persecution usually. So, you know, some of the people I interviewed when I was in Tijuana were victims of gang violence. I interviewed a guy who had driven a taxi in a Mexican town and been ordered to, you know, transport drugs. And when he refused, his whole family was threatened with death. So people are coming, you know, they're trying to flee violence. And they, you know, I think according to the asylum system, they're supposed to be able to get on US land and claim asylum and then have their case heard. But that was changed by Trump, and that is still in place. So what I saw in Tijuana were these huge tent cities, you know, people camping under shelters. When we went to the offices in the morning, there would be a line several blocks long of people waiting to see an attorney and trying to get help to to claim asylum.
Thank you.
Oh, I
So-
had a few other things to say though. There are, they have tried, the Biden administration has tried to get a path to citizenship into several bills. And every time it's gotten blocked, either by the Republican Senate or I don't know, but it never seems to go anywhere. And they've tried this a whole bunch of times. So that's kind of a rough overview.
Okay. Right now, what are the paths to citizenships that you know about? How can anyone become a citizen? You talked a little bit about asylum. Are there other ways that you know of?
So I'm not sure what the path to citizenship is through an asylum case. I know that people, and probably AD, did I pronounce your name correctly? Ide, you can speak more effectively to this, but I know that, for most Mexican immigrants, you get legal residency, you spend a certain number of years here. If you don't commit a crime, then you're eligible for citizenship. But the problem is getting legal residency. And so, for example, my husband had it because he married a US citizen. But for somebody who's not married to an American, it's very, very difficult, and you can wait years. And I know that the attorney, Sergio Garcia, told me that he even got moved down in the line at one point. Like there was, for some reason, he was, I don't know, some incredibly high number. And then one day he checked and they had moved him down. So it takes a long, long time to get legal residency.
My parents, my dad was, for resources wise, but financially, we could only really afford my dad first to get started with the process. And then he was able to sponsor my mom, which is problematic if you're in an abusive relationship, to have your sponsor be in charge of that situation. Back then I didn't know anything about, Violence Against Women's Act or anything like that. But by the time my parents were both became legal residents, I turned 18. And so as an adult, they couldn't make me a citizen. Just, I wasn't going to be naturally a citizen just because they were. And so I had to start my own process and my own expenses, my own application. And so that wasn't the goal, but I came to this country when I was 7 years old. And so I didn't, that whole time, my family was still working towards it. So like I said, in the meantime, like qualifying for services like unemployment benefits or things like that, those aren't available. There's very little help and resources for families and parents who, because they don't have legal residency yet, there's a lot of things they don't qualify for, which was always really shocking to me to hear. Like people get really angry about my community taking up resources and money, and that was not true. Like they painted this image that we were getting all the hookups, and that's not true. And so it takes a long time, and it's very discouraging. And I think I was in college, and I took a break too from just following up because one, I didn't have every application is a new chunk of money. And just the motivation and the discipline as a young person to be like navigating that whole system and on my own and educating myself legally and advocating for yourself, because you get a lot of pushback, you get a lot of attitude, you get a lot of misleading and running around, and so all of that stuff, since it actually drained me enough where I kind of stepped back and just was focusing on school. So I could have gotten my citizenship way sooner, but it kind of can be a little life sucking, you know, so it's just, I learned a lot about myself just through that process, but I could speak English. You know, a lot of people aren't able to use their voice to recognize when someone is really not doing their job and they're just complicating it more for you because they have their own biases, regardless of what they do as a career.
So do you guys know about sponsoring someone to become a US citizen? Can a US citizen sponsor an immigrant to become a citizen?
I think you can sponsor a closely related family member, but I don't know a lot about it because I've never tried to do it.
Yeah.
And there's a process for that. You know, like it was fairly routine for my husband to get his legal residency because we were married in Mexico. We went up to the border, had an interview with the consulate. They realized it as an authentic marriage. And so he automatically had his residency. So I think a citizen can request legal residency for a close family member. And then they would go through the process of coming and, but you know, even legal residency could take years unless it's a spouse, I think.
I think it's about 5 years. You get a 10-year, you get a 5-year green card, and then you get a 10-year, and then yeah. So yes, I think it does take some time, and when you're married, I think it takes only 3 years, from what I know. But it's definitely is a long process. It's a financially taxing and emotionally. If you are able to hire an attorney to help you, that can help. Not a lot of people can do that. So that's another issue. We did see that one of the victims, he was actually residing in the US with his family, and he was deported because he had a traffic violation. So that also shows the danger, and that, you know, what residents or citizen can get away with when you really are when you are not resident or citizen. There is a lot that you can do, and you are also living in fear all the time because you can't. So even though he was already here, he got separated with his family, which brings another issue about families being separated. You know, all his family is here. He was deported back there, and it's after 5 years, probably after trying to get back, that he decided to take this route. So do you guys know about any ways once you are being deported, any legal ways that you can get back, or is it the end for you once you are deported or you commit any violation? I'm talking about minor violations like a traffic violation.
Yeah, it's really hard because when we were interviewing people in Tijuana in March, it was March of 2020, one of the things we asked was, have you been deported? And if they had been deported as undocumented immigrants, and if there was any kind of violation, it made the case, if not impossible, very, very much a long shot. So once you have a deportation record, I think it's hard to ever think that you can come legally. Yeah, I was in Mexico in August and met a man who had been deported, not because of the traffic violation, but he was undocumented. The restaurant in Los Angeles where he was working was raided, and his whole family was here, and he had been there, you know, he had been working in LA for like 25 years. His whole life was there. So it's very difficult, I think, for people who've made their lives here to get deported.
I do know that when I was going through my process, the citizenship applications, and they do ask you if you if you have any violation, even a traffic violation, and that was like, oh my goodness. I wish I knew, because I've never knew that, you know, really having a pending traffic violation and stuff can impede in you like getting your citizenship. So it doesn't have to be a big thing. So when you hear that your citizenship has been denied, usually people might assume that like, you know, any violent crime, but it really doesn't have to be. I'm not saying it cannot happen, that, you know, you go through the process and then you get it again, but that question sure is there. So let's see. It's trying to get away from the hard part of this of the movie, but it's reality. It is reality. And I remember, I live in Northern California. We have some fires, and I had to evacuate one. And I remember picking up my daughters, putting them in the car and driving from Redding to all the way to Davis until I can find a motel where we could stay. During that time, I just thought about, well, there are people who are fleeing their country or their place because they face with a danger. And at that moment, you know, you don't think about anything. You're thinking about the next place where you can get to safety or get your kids to safety. And I was talking to someone who asked me, well, you've been here legally. Well, I had a different path. I think I was privileged to not have to go through the funneling system and go through all that danger. So yes, and my question was like, they know it's dangerous, but they send their kids to go die there. And I'm like, are you a mom? She's like, yes. How do you love your child? It's like, well, do you think that knowingly, if you know there is a hope from your child here, you would let that person go and take that dangerous path? I think sometimes we need to remember that we are humans, and for someone to take those drastic steps, it has to be like maybe what they're living is completely life threatening. And they did say in the movie, one of the guys said, one of the child says that the only option was to really join the mafia, the cartel. So if you want to have a life, that's one option, which is really becoming criminal too. So if you are running away, you don't want to become a criminal, and yet once you make it, you are treated as a criminal. There is some paradox and hardship there. There is a lot of in here. And as Leslie said, I had to watch it twice. The first time that I started to watch it, I was, you know, I thought it's something that I can watch while I'm eating, and I just dropped the food, and I couldn't. I had to recoup myself and then watch it again. And
no, it's not you can't do anything else while you watch the film. I learned that too. It takes your whole attention.
Do you have hope that this movie would change the way that people see immigration, or will see people crossing the border?
I certainly hope it does. I mean, what I saw in the film is like the students, those forensic anthropology students. There's so many people that are involved in trying to give families closure, and they don't work for the government, really. They're just self-motivated because they saw a need, and they see humans as deserving of, you know, of integrity and all that. But I hope that this film does give some insight on who these people are that are coming and crossing the border. There's a lot of the use of it and one of them, and just very you know, just minimizing that they're people. And so I really think that this film did a good job of showing the lives of these people, how complex they are. There's so many intersections of experiences, and Eddie, even he used the word cynicism. You know, he's like, we just got to not be cynical. And and I know that in a working in a field where you're not giving enough resources and tools to do your job, like the sheriff, there's one sheriff in that whole area. I mean, people get run down and they start to change internally. It's all that secondary trauma exposure, you know, not having the support that even people that are there to help start to just become apathetic or angry or cynical. And it's just it causes a lot of harm. And so the compassion that I think that it brought out of me, even though it's a personal experience that I can relate to, I just hope that it taps into other people's compassion too, and realize that using the word illegal, I mean, making a life choice and abandoning so much for an opportunity, that's not a crime. You know, giving your loved ones an opportunity is not a crime. And so we need to stop labeling people and just being aware of what specific words do to us. You think of a word illegal, you will immediately start envisioning all kinds of bad things, you know? And so just stop planting those seeds because it is motivating, you know, these border volunteers, and they have their own resources. They have more resources than the government are providing these sheriff stations. They have night gear vision, they have ATVs, you know, it's just, I just really appreciate this film a lot.
Thank you. It looks like we have only a few minutes. So do you have something that you want to say to close before we leave? Hopes? Any hope?
I think the film did a really good job of showing how inhumane it is, you know, to handle things the way we're handling them. I mean, to just let 20,000 people disappear, it's just so morally unacceptable. And I think that was one of the accomplishments of this film. You know, no matter how people feel about immigration, it makes a compelling case for dealing with it, for some kind of immigration reform, for some kind of consensus on what, you know, what we're going to do. I don't think, like, most people understand the interconnectedness of the United States with Latin American countries that have supplied so much labor here. And it's a hard thing to sort of understand the scope of, if unless you're a contractor maybe, or in some kind of business where you realize that that's where your labor force is coming from. But no matter how people feel, it just is such a compelling argument for doing something that's more humane than what we're doing. And, you know, I personally feel like we just really have to keep advocating for humane immigration reform. And it's going to be a hard fight. It's going to be a hard fight because there's so many other problems in the country.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we can't give up.
Yes, we can't give up. And as it said in the movie, the roots of activism is sharing, you know, is when something really touches you. So for him, it was seeing his friends coming from the war in body bags. So I'm really hoping that this movie, you know, once people see it, it would stir some kind of reaction. Maybe more people would volunteer to bring, like, you know, waters there. Maybe more farmers will open up their place. So at least that, so they can have more water stations. And that is my hope, and praying that things change. Before we end, I would like to thank you all for joining us, and thanks for really making a hard movie and discussion more bearable. And before we end, I would thank KXC for doing this, and I want to invite everyone for our next film screening, which will be a part, and it's on February 17. So it's next month, February 17. Stay tuned for our next screening. Thank you all.